So I'll run you through the ingredients. We'll start off with our meat. So we're using 1 kilogram of beef shin. I went down to my local butcher's, I asked him to take it off the bone. It's going to be fantastically melt in the mouth, lovely and moist as well. I have 2 onions that are finely diced and 150 grams of button mushrooms. We'll quarter them a bit later on. I have 75 grams of butter, 300 mils or roughly 3/4 of a can of Guinness, you can drink the rest, 1 tablespoon of tomato puree, 1.5 teaspoons of red wine vinegar and 1.5 teaspoons of balsamic vinegar, 4 tablespoons of plain flour, 2 tablespoons of golden granulated sugar, you can use golden caster sugar if you prefer, 2 tablespoons of dried thyme, or if you've got fresh thyme, just use a small bunch, 2 bay leaves, and half a teaspoon of black pepper. I also have 400 mils of beef stock. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is make sure we have a nice large casserole dish with a lid that can be used on the hob as well as in the oven. We're just going to use it on the hob today. So remove the lid for now and turn the heat on to a medium low. We're just going to go straight in with our butter, get that melted, throw our onions in, our thyme and our 2 bay leaves. Give them a bit of a stir, just going to allow them to caramelise off a little bit while we work on our beef. So, our 1 kilogram of beef shin. All we're going to do, make sure your knife is nice and sharp. We're just going to chop our beef roughly into 1-inch chunks. Pop them back in the bowl. Okay, fantastic. So, when you've finished slicing up your beef shin, you're going to add your 4 tablespoons of flour. Get your hands in there, just work that around. Make sure you get a good coating on all of your beef. As well as helping us to seal our beef, this is just going to thicken up our sauce as well, our gravy. Perfect. So hopefully, as you can see, our onions have started to go golden brown. So at this point then, we're going to add our beef. We're going to seal that for about 7 to 10 minutes, just until our beef has browned off all the way around. Okay, so keep your eye on this beef and give it a stir every minute or so, make sure it gets a nice even seal all the way around. While that's cooking off there, we're just going to take our button mushrooms, cut them into quarters. You can leave them whole if you want, I just prefer smaller pieces in my pie. So keep your eye on your beef shin, give it a stir every minute or so, just to make sure it gets browned off nice and evenly. So the reason we're using beef shin as opposed to a braising steak or a stewing steak, I just think beef shin, although it is slightly more expensive, you can still get a kilogram for under £10. It's enough to feed 6 people. I just think the thing I look for in a pie is that melt in the mouth beef, where you bite into it and it gives that really long, slow cooked effect. Beef shin is absolutely fantastically full of flavour and it will melt in the mouth. Next up, we're going to add our sugar, our black pepper and our tomato puree. Give all that a really good stir, get it all nicely combined. Alright, brilliant. Now that's nicely mixed up, we're going to add our vinegars, so our balsamic and our red wine vinegar, our Guinness and our beef stock. Give that a nice mix to work everything together. So now we're going to bring this to the boil, reduce the heat to a light simmer, cover and leave it to cook for 1.5 hours. That means it's going to be so tender after 1.5 hours of cooking. Okay, so reduce that to a light simmer, cover, leave for 1.5 hours. So while our pie filling is cooking, we're going to work on this pastry. We're going to make a short crust pastry because I think that works better with a steak pie. You'll need 650 grams of plain flour, 150 grams of lard and 100 grams of butter with a little extra for the pie dish. I've just chopped these up into cubes. 2 teaspoons of English mustard powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 275 millilitres of cold water. Okay, so to start with, we're going to add our mustard powder and our salt to our flour, and then we're going to work in our lard and our butter using our thumbs. You don't want any big bits, so just take your time with this. Make sure you get it nice and evenly worked into your flour. Okay, so we're about there. So now we're going to gradually add our water, bit by bit, work it together with our hands to eventually form a nice pastry dough ball. Okay, perfect. So when you've formed your dough ball, we're then going to wrap our pastry in cling film and place it in the fridge so that gluten structure can work its magic. It's going to go into the fridge for a minimum of half an hour. So while our pastry is resting in the fridge and our pie is finishing off for its last 10 or 15 minutes on the stove here, I'm going to prepare your pie dish. So grab yourself roughly a 9 or 10 inch pie dish, and we're going to grease this with that little bit of butter that we kept over from earlier. Make sure you get everywhere, all the way around the top, heavily greased. And we're also just going to lightly dust our pie dish too. That's just going to add another layer of protection and stop our pie from sticking. So set your pie dish to a side. We're just going to crack 2 eggs into a bowl and just beat them lightly with a couple of tablespoons cold water. This is what we're going to use for our egg wash for the top of the pie. It's going to help give it that lovely golden brown finish. Again, set that to the side for when we need it later. Okay, so we've just reached our 1.5 hour milestone. Our gravy is thickened up nicely and our beef is very tender. As you can see, it just pulls apart with a knife. That's exactly what we're looking for. So I'm just going to set that to a side now with the lid off, allow that to cool while we roll out our pastry. So as always, essential to have a heavily floured work surface and a floured rolling pin. So you're going to cut roughly 1/3 of your pastry off and set that aside for the lid. That's for later on. So gently roll it out until it's just under 1/2 centimetre thickness all the way around. You don't want it too thick or your pastry won't cook. Too thin, it'll just break and it'll burn as well. So I always find the best way of doing this, because we want the pastry to sit right inside our dish, you pop your pie dish onto your pastry, and then if you go an inch and a half bigger all the way around, don't throw away this excess, we'll use that later on. Fantastic. And then we can sit this pastry into our dish, just gently make sure it's all the way into our pie dish and it leaves this overhang around the edge. So set this to a side just for the moment and then we'll roll out our lid. You want your lid roughly the same thickness as your pie base. Okay, perfect. So now, again, do the same, about 1 inch to 1.5 inches bigger than your pie dish. So, again, I'm going to set this to a side just for later on. Okay, preheat your oven to 200 degrees. So this next bit is very, very important. You're going to take your pie mixture using a slotted spoon. What we're looking for is the meat. We don't want too much of this gravy or it's just going to make the bottom of our pie soggy. So use a slotted spoon. You can even drain this through a sieve if you want, just make sure you keep the gravy. So we're just looking mainly for the chunks of meat, mushroom and onion. You can use the gravy later. You want to fill this pie up as best you can so it's just a little bit above the rim of the dish. Next then, make sure you're quite nice and delicate. Take your pie lid, just place it over the top of your pie. I'm just going to take your knife and just gently and carefully cut off this excess around the outside of your pie. And yet again, don't throw this excess away, keep it till later. And then around the outside of the pie, it's entirely up to you. You can either crimp it by placing one finger in between all the way around, just like this. That forms a lovely crust all the way around. Or, if you prefer, you can take a fork all the way around the edge, and then using the back of your fork, we're going to make two little holes in the very centre of the pie. This is going to allow our steam to escape, and then using our excess, you can decorate the pie any way you want. You can leave it like this if you prefer, or you can pop some leaves on it, some stars, you can lattice the top, whatever you prefer. I'm just going to use a couple of leaves because it's quite traditional. So the leaves are very easy to make. You simply draw them with your knife. And then we stick them to the top of our pie using a little egg wash. Gently take your egg wash that we made earlier, give it a nice generous spreading, and then pop your little leaves on your pie wherever you want. Fantastic. And then once more, a little egg wash on the top of your decoration. So now we're just going to place this into our preheated oven for 40 minutes. Don't forget to save the rest of that gravy from earlier, because it makes a fantastic accompaniment for our pie.